There are behaviors that at first glance seem casual, unpretentious, even harmless. However, when repeated with intensity and frequency, they can reveal something much deeper, a silent obsession operating behind the conscious mind. There is a hidden language in gestures, glances, and actions, and this language doesn't lie. Behind every attempt at contact, every sudden appearance, or every seemingly innocent comment, there may be a powerful psychic mechanism at work, often unknown even to the person exhibiting it. Today, we will explore the signs that reveal an emotional fixation disguised using the teachings of analytical psychology. What lies behind certain repetitive behaviors? What does this reveal about the male psyche? And more importantly, why does it affect you so much? If you've ever felt that there's more to it than meets the eye, comment below. I recognize the invisible signs. From the perspective of Carl Jung's analytical psychology, obsessive behaviors reveal much more than just desire or interest. They are expressions of the unconscious projecting onto another. When someone demonstrates a persistent pattern of attention or closeness, they may be experiencing an unconscious activation of deep psychic contents, particularly the anima, the feminine archetype within the male unconscious. In this case, obsession isn't really about the person themselves, but about the symbolic image they represent. According to Jung, we tend to project onto others aspects of ourselves that we don't recognize, both light and shadow. A man who seems excessively involved, who continuously seeks your presence, may be projecting onto you aspects he hasn't integrated himself. He might see in you a figure that connects him to his own process of individuation without being consciously aware of it. Obsession then arises from a lack of psychic integration. The other becomes a fascinating mirror, a bridge to lost parts of the self. This behavior can also be driven by the shadow, repressed parts of the personality seeking expression and recognition. When the energy of the shadow isn't confronted, it infiltrates relationships, distorting affection and creating bonds marked by emotional dependence. Understanding these signs through Jung's lens allows us to look beyond the surface. It invites us to ask, what exactly does he see in me? And even more, what do I awaken in him that he himself doesn't understand? According to Carl Jung, we all carry unconscious images of the opposite sex within us. In men, this inner image is called the anima, a feminine archetype representing sensitivity, intuition, relational ability, and emotional connection. When a man doesn't consciously recognize or integrate his anima, he tends to project it onto an external woman. And it is precisely this projection that can lead to obsessive behaviors, often disguised as genuine interest. What may appear to be just intense attraction might actually be the unconscious reflection of something he's seeking within himself, but believes he finds in you. The projected anima idealizes, enchants, and mystifies. The real woman is transformed into a symbolic, almost mystical figure. He isn't relating to who you truly are, but to the archetypal image his psyche has created and deposited in you. And it is this distortion that drives him to act repeatedly, to try to get closer without clear explanations, to manifest signs that seem disproportionate or unnecessary. One of the main signs of this projection is the constant attempt at coincidences. He always shows up where you are, sends messages without a real reason, starts conversations with weak excuses. These actions express a need for connection, but often they don't come with true, deep, or mature contact. This happens because he is reacting to the symbolic energy you represent, not to your real personality. He's drawn to what you awaken in him, not necessarily to who you are. Another sign is excessive idealization. When the anima is projected, the woman is seen as perfect, as a savior, as the bearer of a greater meaning. This view creates unrealistic expectations and feeds frustration as the man begins to depend on the woman's presence to maintain the link with this internal image. And when this presence threatens to disappear through absence, rejection, or change of behavior, he may intensify his obsessive actions, desperately trying to maintain contact with the representation of his anima. Body language also shifts in this context. The gaze becomes more fixed, the tone of voice changes. There is a tendency toward repetitive physical closeness, as if the whole body were trying to convey something the conscious mind has yet to grasp. He might listen to you with exaggerated attention or repeat phrases you've said in an unconscious attempt to maintain the symbolic link. Every word you speak takes on more weight than usual, as if it were a coded message only he understands, when in reality, it is his psyche trying to reconnect with something it lost internally. Obsession is an unconscious plea for reintegration. The projected anima is an unconscious call for the man to turn inward, to recognize that what he seeks in the other is in fact within himself. But as long as this process doesn't happen, he will continue revolving around the external image, feeding behaviors that seem romantic but are driven by a deep archetypal dynamic. This is why many women intuitively feel that there's something more in the behavior of certain men. The energy that emanates from them is dense, captivating, but confusing. That's because it's not conscious love, it's an intense projection of the unintegrated anima. And it's crucial that the woman understands this dynamic to avoid getting lost in the other person's psychic game. She is not responsible for healing this internal split, but can protect herself by understanding where these behaviors come from and what they truly mean. While the anima represents the unconscious feminine side of a man, the shadow symbolizes everything he rejects, represses, or is unaware of within himself. Carl Jung defined the shadow as the dark side of the psyche, not necessarily bad, but excluded from consciousness. And when it isn't recognized, it infiltrates relationships, distorts affections, and creates ambiguous behaviors, often intense, enigmatic, and even dangerous. In a man who exhibits obsession for a woman, the presence of the shadow may be silently at work, transforming desire into control, attention into invasion, and affection into a need for possession. The shadow contains repressed desires, unacknowledged impulses, and unprocessed emotions. Often the man is unaware of the emotional burden he carries. He may convince himself he is simply being kind, interested, or present, when in reality, he is driven by an unconscious force that compels him to get closer, control, and absorb the other. This desire is not clear or rational. It's disguised, sometimes by a stance of friendship, other times by a supposed concern, or even by sudden and disproportionate emotional involvement compared to the real relationship. When a man is obsessed, he tends to wear masks. The shadow acts hidden behind seemingly acceptable behaviors. He may present himself as someone who just wants to help, who genuinely cares, who is always there if you need him. However, behind this availability is an unconscious desire to invade, to merge with the object of his fascination, to claim what he feels is out of reach. Obsession is born from this internal gap. He cannot bear the absence of the other because that absence brings him face to face with his own emptiness. This type of behavior reveals a profound denial of his own shadow. Instead of confronting his insecurities, fears, jealousy, and impulses, he projects all of this onto the relationship with the woman. She becomes not only the idealization of the anima, but also the repository of his deepest, unmet needs. This is why many of these men oscillate between acts of adoration and aggressive frustration. They love and hate, become enchanted and despise, approach and withdraw, all in the same cycle. This back and forth is the direct reflection of the unintegrated shadow. Another important aspect is the tendency towards subtle manipulation. When the shadow is active, it uses indirect means to exert control. The man may use ambiguous phrases, give compliments with hidden intentions, or provoke jealousy as a way to test the limits of the bond. All of this is an expression of a desire that cannot be openly acknowledged. Obsession feeds on what is unsaid, suggested, and implied. The woman perceives this energy, even when the words seem neutral. There is something in his gaze, in his silence, in his body language that betrays the presence of the shadow, an inexplicable discomfort, a tension in the air. The male psyche, when not working through its shadow, ends up seeking in relationships a way to avoid internal confrontation. Obsession, then, is not just about the woman, it is about what she activates in him. She becomes an involuntary mirror, capable of reflecting all that he would prefer to keep hidden. And the stronger the projection, the more uncontrollable he becomes. This explains why, even without reciprocation, some men continue to insist. The issue is no longer about you, but what you represent in the dark territories of his soul. Recognizing the shadow is not an easy task. It requires the courage to face one's own impulses, admit weaknesses, and take responsibility for one's emotions. But until this happens, obsession remains active, disguised as romance, masked by good intentions, but rooted in a flight from the self. The woman, in turn, must learn to identify the signs of the disguised shadow so as not to fall into the trap of thinking she is being admired when, in fact, she is being used as an escape valve for an emotional universe that is not hers. In analytical psychology, repetition is not just a behavioral habit, it is a symbol. When an attitude repeats itself without the person being fully aware of why, we are faced with a psychic pattern seeking expression. Repetition carries a message from the unconscious. In cases of obsession, this pattern is even more evident. It reveals itself in persistent attempts at contact, the same phrases being said at different moments, actions returning cyclically, even in the face of silence, rejection, or indifference. Jung teaches us that the unconscious speaks in symbols, and repetition is one of the most direct ways. A man obsessed with a woman tends to repeat gestures, attitudes, and words. He shows up in the same places, sends similar messages, uses predictable strategies to get closer. Even if seemingly spontaneous, these behaviors are linked to an internal movement that seeks connection at any cost. He isn't just trying to maintain external contact. He is, in fact, trying to contain an internal anguish that intensifies every time the woman pulls away or doesn't respond as he would like. Repetition, in this case, is an unconscious emotional regulation mechanism. This pattern often originates from old wounds, especially those linked to childhood. Experiences of rejection, abandonment, emotional neglect, or lack of recognition create core feelings of deprivation in the psyche that later reactivate in romantic relationships. The feminine figure comes to symbolize the presence that was missing in the past. When this woman shows even minimal receptiveness, the man projects onto her the possibility of repair. But at the same time, he fears rejection again, and so he insists, repeats, reappears. Obsessive behavior is an unconscious attempt to avoid reliving the original pain of abandonment. The curious thing is that often he is unaware that he is repeating. He justifies his actions as legitimate interest, concern, or affection. But if that were the case, there would be space for silence, for waiting, for accepting the other's timing. Obsession doesn't allow for pauses. It feeds on urgency. Repetition doesn't arise from affection, but from unresolved absence. And the more he tries to fill this void with the woman's presence, the more intensely the unconscious reinforces the cycle, because what he is seeking cannot be found outside of himself. This type of attachment also has a deep connection with the maternal complex. Jung pointed out that when a man remains unconsciously attached to the image of the mother, whether through idealization, dependence, or conflict, he tends to repeat this bond in romantic relationships. The woman becomes a kind of symbolic mother, a source of nurturing meaning and identity. Obsessive repetition is, therefore, a regressive form of seeking fusion. He doesn't just want to be close, he wants to be recognized, validated, contained, and he does this through repeated gestures, as if each attempt could ensure the permanence of the bond. The language of repetition is symbolic, but it can be suffocating. For the woman, it's common to feel pressured, invaded, or even manipulated, even if the other person claims to be just showing interest. The discomfort arises because the unconscious recognizes the emotional charge behind the action. Repetition carries a tension. It wants to resolve something, wants to break a cycle, wants to mean what wasn't said. And this will only be possible when the man looks inward, recognizes his pattern, his pain, his past. Without this movement, he will continue trapped in the cycle of repeating, waiting, getting frustrated, and restarting indefinitely. It is important to understand that for the unconscious, repetition is an attempt at healing. But this healing only happens if there is awareness. Otherwise, repetition turns into a prison. The woman, in turn, needs to learn to listen to the signs behind the insistence, not with guilt or anger, but with clarity. She is not responsible for the pain the other person carries, nor can she save him from his internal cycles, but she can protect herself from them, recognizing when repetition has ceased to be language and has become a trap. In Carl Jung's view, every meaningful relationship is, in some way, a symbolic field of transformation. In the case of male obsession for a woman, something deeper is happening. She becomes an archetypal mirror reflecting not only the man's conscious desires, but above all, the hidden contents his psyche needs to integrate. When he observes her, desires her, and idealizes her persistently, he is not just relating to a concrete person. He is, unknowingly, in contact with parts of himself that have been forgotten, denied, or projected. And in this process, the woman takes a central position in his individuation journey, even though often she didn't choose to be in this place. Individuation, for Jung, is the process of becoming who we truly are. It involves integrating the shadow, confronting complexes, recognizing archetypes and moving toward the self. This journey is deep and requires courage. However, for many men, this process begins not through introspection, but through fascination. The presence of a woman who awakens symbolic aspects of the psyche, especially the anima, acts as a trigger for this inner awakening. She becomes the key that opens long-closed doors. It's not that she desires to be this, it's that she ends up occupying this role within his unconscious archetypal structure. As a mirror, the woman reflects both the beauty and chaos the man carries. She may provoke enchantment because she manifests an image he desires to incorporate, but she can also provoke discomfort, frustration, and even anger, because she ends up revealing how far he still is from himself. By projecting his ideals, his repressed sensitivity, his need for integration onto her, he finds himself facing a polarity. Either he pulls her close as a muse, or he rejects her as a threat. In both cases, his relationship with her becomes an external battle that mirrors an internal one. This type of mirroring usually happens without the man being aware of it. He believes he is in love, fascinated, interested. But what is really happening is an archetypal identification. She represents what his soul is seeking to complete. And this search, not being recognized as internal, becomes an external pursuit. The bond he forms with her may not have logic nor proportion. Sometimes there hasn't even been enough real interaction to justify such intensity. Still, the obsession grows, because it's not about her, it's about what she represents. This is when the woman needs to understand her symbolic role, not to take responsibility for it, but to protect herself. When she understands that she is not being seen as a subject, but as a symbol, she can choose more clearly whether she wants to continue in this position. She can also set firm boundaries, without guilt, without trying to save the other person from his unconscious journey. She recognizes that her presence has awakened something in him, but that the path to integration is his responsibility. The mirror can show, but it cannot lead. For the man, this obsession may be a portal. If he can reflect on the intensity of what he feels, if he realizes that his reactions are disproportionate or repetitive, he can begin a process of self-awareness that will lead him to the true meeting with himself. The woman, by not responding as expected, may frustrate him, but it is precisely this frustration that forces him to turn inward, and at this moment, the mirror breaks, revealing not the idealized image, but the very soul that cries out for integration. This movement is painful but liberating. When he stops searching outside for what he is missing inside, he begins the true process of individuation. Obsession dissolves, and in its place arises the possibility of a more conscious relationship, free from projections. The woman, in turn, is no longer the object of a symbolic search and begins to be seen as a real person, with limits, desires, and complexities of her own. Being the archetypal mirror is not a choice, but understanding this role is an act of consciousness, and consciousness is always the first step toward freedom, for both. Throughout this script, we have explored the deep layers of male obsession, analyzing how Jungian archetypes of the anima, the shadow, and the individuation process illuminate the repetitive and sometimes enigmatic behaviors of men who seem to be obsessed with a woman. Obsession is often not about the woman herself, but about the projections and unconscious desires she activates in the male psyche. The woman, as an archetypal mirror, reflects hidden parts of the man, encouraging him to confront his shadows and seek the integration of repressed aspects of his psyche. Obsession, though painful and confusing, can be the catalyst for a transformative process, both for the man and for the woman. Recognizing the signs and understanding the unconscious dynamics can help establish healthy boundaries, protecting oneself from projections and allowing both to continue their individuation journeys. If you've resonated with the themes discussed here, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more profound reflections on human psychology. And if this content resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments and tell us, "I'm ready to look beyond the projections and integrate my shadow." Don't miss the chance to dive deeper into these concepts. See you in the next video.